The old church had been abandoned for decades. Locals whispered of the unspeakable things that had happened within its crumbling walls, of the priests who had vanished without a trace, of the devil's presence lingering in its shadows. No one dared step inside after nightfall. That was the first rule. The second, never answer if someone, or something, knocked at your door after midnight. Eleanor Dawson had never been one for superstitions. A journalist hungry for her next big break, she had chased myths and legends across the country, exposing hoaxes and unraveling mysteries. When an anonymous letter arrived at her apartment, bearing only 6 words, "You must see for yourself," and an address, she felt the familiar rush of excitement. The location? St. Augustine's Chapel, the very church that had been deemed cursed. She had read about the disappearances, the exorcisms gone wrong, the hushed whispers of a presence far more sinister than any lost soul. But that was just folklore, a story to keep children from wandering too far at night. Eleanor didn't believe in ghosts or demons. She believed in facts, and this was just another story waiting to be unraveled. On the night of the investigation, she drove up the winding, overgrown road that led to the church. The structure loomed ahead, its Gothic spires clawing at the darkened sky, the stained-glass windows long shattered, leaving only jagged remnants behind. The air smelled of damp wood and decay, the weight of time pressing down on every stone. She parked her car a few feet away, her camera and notebook secured in her bag. As she approached, a gust of wind whispered through the skeletal remains of trees, carrying with it a faint sound, laughter. It was soft, almost melodic, but tinged with something sinister. Eleanor shuddered and shook it off. The mind played tricks in places like this. The front doors, massive and wrought with iron, stood ajar as if inviting her in. That should have been her first warning. But curiosity outweighed caution, and with a deep breath she stepped inside. The church's interior was worse than she had imagined. Pews lay in ruins, their wood splintered and rotting. The altar was covered in dust, the once majestic crucifix hanging askew, its figure of Christ eerily defaced. The silence was suffocating, wrapping around her like an unseen force. Eleanor pulled out her flashlight and scanned the area. Movement. Something darted across the far end of the church. A shadow, impossibly fast. Her breath hitched, but she pressed on. She had spent too much time debunking haunted houses to let a stray shadow deter her. She reached the center aisle when a voice echoed through the hollow space. Eleanor. She froze. Her name? No one knew she was here. She turned sharply, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The darkness remained unmoving, yet the sensation of being watched clawed at her spine. "Who's there?" she called out. Her voice felt small in the vast emptiness. Silence. Then a whisper, right behind her ear. "You were expected." She spun around, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Nothing. Just empty pews and dust motes dancing in the light. She forced herself to steady her breathing. It was a trick. Someone was playing with her. Perhaps another journalist, trying to spook her out of her story. Then the doors slammed shut. The sound thundered through the church, shaking the very foundation. Her flashlight flickered before plunging her into darkness. A sharp, guttural growl reverberated from the altar. Eleanor fumbled for her phone, using its screen's glow to illuminate her surroundings. And that was when she saw it. Atop the altar stood a figure cloaked in black, its face hidden beneath a hood. It was tall, unnaturally so, its presence radiating something far worse than mere intimidation. "The devil prays too," the figure rasped. "And tonight he prays for you." Eleanor stumbled backward, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had faced con men, staged hauntings, but this This felt real. Her fingers trembled as she tried to dial for help. But the moment she looked down, she saw her phone screen filled with words. "You must see for yourself." A scream built in her throat, but before she could release it, the figure moved, fast and inhumanly fluid. The last thing she saw before everything went black was its elongated fingers reaching for her. Then, silence. A cold, wet sensation dragged Eleanor from the abyss of unconsciousness. Her eyes fluttered open to a suffocating darkness, the damp scent of mold filling her lungs. She lay on something hard, stone, slick with moisture. Her hands, trembling, explored her surroundings. Chains, thick, rusted, and coiled around her wrists. Panic surged through her as she tugged against them, the metal biting into her skin. She wasn't alone. Somewhere in the distance, slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. A match flared to life, casting flickering shadows on the stone walls. The cloaked figure stood a few feet away, its hood concealing whatever monstrosity lurked beneath. "You are awake," it murmured, its voice reverberating unnaturally. "Good. The ritual requires your consciousness." Eleanor's stomach churned. "Ritual?" Her pulse roared in her ears as she struggled against her restraints. "Let me go," she spat, her voice hoarse. The figure tilted its head, as if considering. Then, with slow precision, it reached into its robes and withdrew something small and delicate. A silver locket. Eleanor's breath hitched. That was her mother's. She had lost it years ago. "How did you?" "You have always been chosen, Eleanor," the figure whispered. "You just refused to see." The match burned out, plunging the chamber into darkness once more. And then something else stirred in the shadows, something vast, something breathing. Eleanor opened her mouth to scream, but a clawed hand clamped over her lips. Eleanor's screams were swallowed by the suffocating blackness. The grip over her mouth was cold, the texture rough like ancient stone. A deep, rattling breath whispered past her ear, carrying the scent of rot and decay. She thrashed against the unseen force holding her, but it was useless. The figure in the cloak murmured something in a language Eleanor didn't understand. The sound slithered through the darkness, and whatever held her let go. She fell to the stone floor, gasping for air. A torch ignited, illuminating the chamber. It was vast, the ceiling lost to the shadows. Strange symbols had been carved into the walls, pulsating with a sickly crimson glow. In the center stood an altar, its surface stained dark. The hooded figure loomed over her. "The ritual must continue," it intoned. Eleanor's pulse pounded. "What ritual?" she demanded. The figure reached into its robe again, withdrawing an ancient dagger. The blade shimmered, etched with the same glowing symbols. "The one that will finally set him free." Eleanor's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she stared at the ancient dagger in the cloaked figure's grasp. The blade shimmered in the dim torchlight, its eerie glow pulsing as though alive. The chamber's symbols flickered in response, casting a haunting rhythm of red and black across the cold stone walls. "This is madness," Eleanor hissed, yanking at the chains still fastened to her wrists. "You're not freeing anything. You're playing with forces you don't understand." The figure tilted its head. "We understand perfectly," it whispered. "It is you who has been blind." A deep growl rumbled from the darkness beyond the altar. Something enormous shifted, its presence sending a wave of cold air across Eleanor's skin. She shuddered but refused to look. The figure stepped forward, holding the dagger over Eleanor's chest. "You were chosen, long before you were born." Eleanor's mind raced. There had to be a way out. If she gave in to fear, she was as good as dead. She forced herself to focus. The chains, old, rusted. If she could weaken them. She twisted her wrists sharply, the jagged metal digging into her skin, drawing blood. Pain shot through her arms, but she kept going, pulling, twisting, feeling the links strain under the pressure. The figure raised the dagger higher, murmuring an incantation. The walls trembled, the ground quaking beneath Eleanor's body. From the shadows, glowing eyes blinked open, dozens of them watching, waiting. No time. It was now or never. Summoning every ounce of strength, Eleanor yanked her arms apart with a violent snap. The weakened chains shattered, sending shards of rusted metal clattering to the floor. The cloaked figure barely had time to react before Eleanor surged forward. She grabbed the dagger from its grasp and drove her knee into its chest, sending it stumbling backward. A deafening roar shook the cavern. Whatever lurked in the darkness was angry, furious. Eleanor spun, heart hammering, as an unseen force lunged toward her. She dove to the side just as a massive clawed hand slashed through the air where she had been. The impact sent stone shards flying. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the dagger. The cloaked figure rose again, but this time its hood slipped back, revealing a grotesque, inhuman face. Its skin stretched too tight, its eyes hollow pits of shadow. "You cannot fight fate," it rasped. "He is coming." The chamber shook again, the glowing symbols intensifying, bleeding light like open wounds. The darkness was no longer just an absence of light. It was alive, twisting, writhing, reaching for her. Eleanor gritted her teeth. She had one shot at this. She turned the dagger in her grip and, without hesitation, plunged it into the altar. A scream, inhuman, agonized, ripped through the cavern. The shadows convulsed, recoiling, writhing as an unseen force resisted them. The glowing eyes flickered, then disappeared one by one. The cloaked figure staggered, its form dissolving into wisps of black smoke. "No, you don't understand." The chamber walls cracked, deep fissures splitting the stone. The entire place was collapsing. Eleanor didn't wait. She bolted toward the only visible exit, dodging falling debris, the air thick with dust and ancient whispers. She reached the tunnel leading upward, her legs burning as she climbed. The roar of destruction followed her, but she didn't look back. As she burst through the entrance, cold night air hit her face. The church stood silent before her, the once open doors now sealed shut. The ground rumbled, but then nothing. Silence. Eleanor fell to her knees, gripping the locket still in her pocket. She had survived, or so she thought. Behind her, a voice whispered, "You may have delayed him, but he is not done with you yet." Eleanor froze, her heart hammering in her chest. The voice behind her was unmistakable, deep, guttural, layered with something ancient and insidious. She turned slowly, gripping the dagger still slick with the ichor of whatever entity she had just fought. But there was no one there. Only the wind howled through the desolate landscape. The church stood still, its Gothic spires piercing the stormy sky. The ground beneath her was eerily quiet, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Then came the laughter. It started as a whisper, curling through the air like smoke, before rising into a chorus of voices. Dozens, maybe hundreds, mocking, taunting, celebrating. Eleanor clutched her head as the sound burrowed into her skull, each voice clawing at her sanity. "You think it's over?" one voice crooned. "You think you stopped him?" The church doors groaned open, despite being sealed shut just moments before. A deep, pulsing crimson glow emanated from within, illuminating the darkened interior. Eleanor hesitated. She had no desire to step back inside that accursed place, but she knew, deep down, she had no choice. Summoning what little strength remained, She stepped forward. The air inside was thick, suffocating, charged with energy so dark it made her skin prickle. The pews had rotted into jagged, blackened husks. The altar, once a sacred place, now stood drenched in shadow, shifting unnaturally like a living thing. Then she saw him. The entity sat upon the altar, legs crossed, draped in a cloak that seemed woven from the very essence of night. His face was obscured, shifting between forms, a skull, a monstrous grin, a handsome stranger. His eyes, however, remained the same, hollow, endless voids. "Ah," he said, his voice smooth, almost amused. "The girl who tried to defy fate." Eleanor's grip tightened on the dagger. "I stopped you." He chuckled. "No, you merely delayed the inevitable." He leaned forward, tilting his head. "You carry my mark now." Eleanor's breath hitched. She glanced down at her hands, then at her reflection in the cracked remains of a mirror on the wall. Faint, twisting symbols had begun to etch themselves into her skin, pulsing with a sickly golden light. "No," she whispered. "Oh, yes," he mused. "You opened the gate, whether you meant to or not. You may have destroyed the vessel, but the door remains ajar." Eleanor's stomach twisted. "What do you want from me?" The entity spread his arms. "Simple. A bargain." She didn't answer. She knew better. Deals with devils were never fair. "I offer you freedom," he continued. "You walk away from this, unscathed. No nightmares. No shadows lurking in every corner. You can live a normal life." He gestured, and the images appeared before her. Her old apartment, her mother's embrace, the sunlight filtering through her window. A life she thought she had lost forever. She wanted it. God, she wanted it. But she also knew the cost. "And in return?" she asked warily. He grinned. "A name." Eleanor's pulse pounded. "Whose name?" "Someone to take your place," he said, as if discussing the weather. "A life for a life. That is the way of things." Her mind reeled. It was monstrous. To damn someone else in her stead? To pass this burden to another? She had fought too hard, lost too much. "No," she said firmly. His smile faded. The air around her darkened. The walls of the church seemed to stretch, closing in. "Pity," he murmured. "Then I suppose I'll just have to take what is mine." The shadows surged forward, slamming into Eleanor like a tidal wave. She gasped as they wrapped around her, tightening, burning, pulling her into their depths. 1,000 voices screamed in unison, their agony searing through her mind. She fought, thrashing, kicking, but the darkness consumed everything. Her vision blurred, her body grew cold. Then, light. A brilliant, blinding force erupted from the locket in her pocket. A voice, familiar yet distant, called her name. "Eleanor!" The entity roared as the light sliced through the shadows, forcing them to recoil. Eleanor felt herself being pulled upward, away from the abyss. She landed hard on the ground, coughing, gasping for breath. The church was gone. The entity was gone. She was outside again, beneath a grey morning sky. The wind carried the scent of rain, fresh and clean. The locket lay open in her hand, its once dull surface now glowing faintly. She had survived. But deep inside, she knew the fight was far from over. The door had been left ajar, and something was still waiting on the other side.